Hello and welcome back to the studio. In this tutorial we're going to paint this realistic watercolor robin. I'm really excited to dive in. It's a cute, fluffy little bird, definitely taken during a winter scene. I will, of course, have the reference image up for you. So I've already completed the drawing in this video. If you need help with this drawing, I will have the process video uploaded, linked down in the description for you. For our pigments today, we're going to keep it fairly simple. I'm going to pull in some burnt orange, a little bit of some transparent yellow, which is very similar to like a Winsor yellow or a lemon yellow would also work really well. Just a nice, light, bright, rich yellow. And we're going to pull in some ultramarine blue and a little bit of Winsor red. Also like a cadmium red would work well. So it's just a nice warm, or this is kind of a neutral, but a warm red. Now, we have our primary colors in here. We don't technically need the burnt orange, but it is kind of the perfect hue for this robin. So I thought we'd pull it out anyway, because if you have it, you might as well use it, right? Why do I have all of these paints if I'm only gonna ever use the primaries? All right, to start, I'm actually going to pull out some masking fluids. I'm gonna be using this masking fluid with a brush that I kind of dedicate for this purpose. If you need help with using masking fluid and how to use it without kind of destroying your brushes, I'll have a video on that up here. I just put a little bit of dish soap on it, and that kind of provides a protective barrier so that the masking fluid doesn't ruin my brushes. This is an optional step. It's just one way that I find that you can kind of take away some of the stress and the pressure when you're painting, and it adds just a nice little sparkle. Again, not required, not necessary. You could even, if you don't have this but you want to add something like that, take a sharp white crayon and create a resist as well. All right, so for our masking fluid, I'm just looking at my reference image and I'm picking out areas that have some very thin feathers that I want to kind of keep white and I want to have as a nice highlight. So just nice quick strokes, not too clumped together, not too big, and not too many of them. I'm also going to add a little bit to the eye. Okay, to start, we're going to grab a little bit of our light yellow tone. So for me, it's a transparent yellow. I'm going to place just a quick wash of this on the breast. It's really more of a glaze. I'm working on the underpainting. It's very light paint, so there's not a lot of paint on my brush. And we're just going to place this right at the center of the breast. This will add a nice little glow and kind of really help everything to kind of shine out of it. Now we're not applying it everywhere where we have some of that orange tone, just kind of here where we want to have a little bit of extra life. So I am going to put it around his little face, but again, like I'm not putting it exactly around the eye, even though there's quite a bit of orange there. And I'm going to apply just a touch down here where we have just kind of some warmth. I might even pull a little bit of it down there. I'm avoiding this area because it is pretty white. All right, so that's our initial glaze. I'm going to do the same thing, but a little different with ultramarine blue. When I'm looking at the reference image, anywhere that I see some of the gray kind of poking out underneath, I'm going to add a little bit of this blue. Now again, very light, it's very watered down. We're just kind of giving a hint of what's going on and helping to define this space a little bit more. I've got a little bit of it here. I'm actually going to water it down even more. I'm even going to, I see some of it up here. I'm going to blend it in this way. It's okay if they touch and blend a little bit together. We'll kind of make sense of it as we go. You just don't want it to be like a bright green, but because we're using such light layers of these colors, it should be fine. Again, just anywhere where we see kind of more of the gray tones, I'm adding some of this blue. I'm also going to add a little bit to the underside of the wings and the tail feathers. Being careful not to hit any of the highlighted feathers. So if you look in the drawing, see how we've got this area. This is kind of negative painting where rather than being just a bad thing, it's where you're kind of blocking out the shapes. And instead of painting this section, kind of this positive space, we're painting what goes behind it, or the negative space. All right, and that's our initial underpainting. Now I'm sure, I hope you're not nervous, I'm sure that the colors you were thinking we were going to use was not initially yellow and blue for our robin, but I promise it will all come together. Now we're going to go back to our palette quickly and we're going to mix a brown color, and we're going to use this neutral tone back and forth throughout the entire painting process. So we're going to mix complementary colors, so our burnt orange and our ultramarine blue, and we're going to mix them together in a way to get two different neutral tones. We're going to have a warmer tone, which has a little bit more of the burnt orange, and we're going to have a cooler tone, which has a little bit more of the blue. So mixing these two together, this is probably where we're going to end up with our cooler tone, where it really has a gray look and kind of a blue tone look. So then on this half, this upper section, I'm going to mix a little bit more of our burnt orange in it to get a warmer brown tone. This is what we'll use for the bulk of the bird and kind of like his cap and his feathers, but it's nice to have this cooler tone, especially where we've placed some of the blue already, that will help to bring out some of those gray undertones that we see in the bird. Now, one of the values of having a really detailed illustration, which I think is the key if you are really serious about painting more realistically, is making sure that your drawing is top-notch. As I've already thought through, it's almost like making your plan before you start painting. I've already thought through, okay, like this is the edge of all of these colors, and like this is where like the orange color comes out to here, and I know that because there's a line drawn here and there's jagged areas, and that really takes some of the guesswork out of painting. And when you're painting with watercolor, oftentimes you need to work fairly quickly just because you have kind of a time limit with what you're working on. So we're going to start off with these brown tones. I'm actually switching to a slightly smaller brush. This is a size 6 round, and this brown tone up on my brush, and we're going to start with the cap and kind of work on the outside down. Don't worry too much about little details. We're going to have an additional pass or an additional layer of painting after this one. So we're just kind of applying that base color down. It's a little bit more than just a base. You can see it's pretty thick overall, especially compared to our previous wash of color. And we're even going over some of this blue section, even though it has the brown in it. And I'm going to stop at this section, rinse my brush off, wipe it off, dip into our gray tone, and I'm just going to tap that in there. Just right where we have kind of this gray section that it's kind of transferring to. Now I'm rinsing it off again, switching back to the brown. We're going to kind of work around where the feathers are by creating little strokes here. Let me zoom in. And then kind of blend them out. And then do the same thing here. So we're leaving some space for some of these whiter feathers. Let's see how we created that there. Now some of this will be taken care of because we have the masking fluid on there, but it's not a bad idea to have some extra care here anyway. Rinsing my brush off, wiping it off on my rag, and I'm going to just blend this color out so that it's nice and soft. Going back in with a little bit more of that thicker paint. I'm just going to continue all the way down. For this section, we have these where these two wings come together. I'm going to leave kind of a negative space where they meet. It's kind of a line here. See that I've created this line. We'll fill that in later, but it will help to create a little bit of definition as we're painting. I'm going to go in with our cooler tone, and again, while this is still wet, I'm just going to kind of dab some of this in here where we've already applied the blue, so it was already a little bit cooler. And again, it will have kind of another pass over it, so don't fuss with it too much, kind of like I'm doing. Sometimes I'm talking more to myself than to you. All right, we're going to repeat that same process for the tail feathers. We're just going to come down. We're going to carefully leave some of this space defined. They may come together more in the end, but at least we have the option if we're keeping them separate at the beginning. And blending in some of this cooler tone. And unfortunately, my camera turned off, and so I missed filling in this section, but I can talk you through it right now. We went in with pure burnt orange. If you don't have burnt orange, a burnt sienna or a mix between our red and yellow will work great. I just kind of want this mid-tone, a little bit dusty. If it's too bright, you might want to add a little bit of blue to it, just a touch, just to kind of tone it down a little bit. And I just carefully went around the edge. Now on this side, I was careful to add only a little bit of texture. You can see kind of a little bit of feather action over here, just a little bit, because on this side we have quite a bit, and it's good to have a place where your eyes can kind of rest and relax, because I want your focal point to be here, and as the eye of the viewer is traveling around, there needs to be a place that's a little bit less intense so that they don't kind of grow tired. Unfortunately, is really just the best way to say it. Now you may notice that this is kind of blotchy. That's okay. It's just our first pass. We're about to start our second pass overall, kind of the whole thing, and everything else will kind of even out, as well as this section. How this is, you know, kind of dark and stark. It will all come together, I promise. All right, so I'm diving into our brown tone once again, and we're going to start working on this section and adding a little bit more detail. So this section, kind of right by the beak, I almost said the nose, is darker. So I want to make sure that I'm adding some good pigment in there. I might even dive into, dip into a little bit of our cooler tone and just dab that in there. Cooler tones tend to recede and just read as darker overall. So having a little bit of that in here will help to for it to read correctly. Back to our brown color. I'm gonna add, and again, kind of like the head is similar to this left-hand side, I want it to be a little less textured. So on this top, it's pretty smooth, and thankfully our reference image reflects that as well. Oops. Because right here where it kind of meets some of this orange, there's a little bit more texture. So I'm going to dip into where the orange is. With a little more paint on my brush. And then as it comes out, I'll smooth it with my brush. All right, I'm going to dip a little bit into our cooler tone again, kind of just going back and forth, because here is a little bit more of a gray tone. I don't want to lose that completely. We already have that blue underneath. But it's light, so I'm actually going to rinse my brush off, dab it off, and just kind of pull some of this up so it doesn't get too dark. Oops. And I'm pressing, when I'm pulling color up, I'm pushing down and I'm pressing as I pull gently, but still it's going to pick up more pigment than it's placing down. All right, back with our brown tone. There's a little bit more light on this side, and so I might kind of intentionally skip some areas just to add a little bit of the look of a highlight. I'm still working with our brown. So I might add some more kind of feather definition, but I'm not going to hit some of the same area. So you'll see this like lighter section. That'll help to create a little bit of depth and dimension. A little bit. I'm going to go in with the brown over this cooler tone area, because that cool tone will kind of shine through. And allow this to be nice and dark. But I'm also going to cover this section that we left blank earlier. All right, now I'm comparing these two and I want them to read very similar, and this is reading much warmer. So while it's still wet, I'm going to go into our cooler tone and see if we can just add some of this blue in without picking up the pigment. It might, since it's wet and it's kind of been sitting here, looks like it's doing okay. Occasionally it will start to pick up the paint instead of placing it down, in which case you just want to wait until it's dry and you can add another glaze in a moment. But it looks like it's doing okay. All right, moving on to our beak and our eye, we're going to use kind of the same color. We're going to take a section of the cooler tone and we're going to try and make it concentrated. So if you have an area on your palette that's dry, kind of pull from that without pulling too much water. And we might need to add a little bit of water in here just to get the flow the way we want it to. See how nice and dark that is? And carefully frame around this beak. Blend it in here. And down. I'm going to kind of cover this section, but we're going to add just a touch of that orange color in here right before we dry. Now I used some masking fluid here so I can kind of cover this whole section without it becoming a problem. Rinsing my brush off quickly. I'm going to take some of our burnt orange. I'm just going to kind of tap that in here. I don't have a lot of water on my brush, so you'll notice it's not really affecting it a lot. It'll just kind of give that little bit of a warm glow as it dries. If you have too much water, it'll kind of create this big puddle. Okay, as that dries, that should blend a little bit more. I'm going back in with that cool tone color after I rinsed my brush off just to make sure that this edge is happy. All right, we'll do another pass on there. We're going to take some of our yellow that we used initially underneath the breast of our little robin, and we're going to cover the bottom section of our eye. So this section that's dark, that's the masking fluid. It just got a little dirty. But I'm going to cover this section of the eye, carefully avoiding the highlighted area. We're going to allow that to dry, going back in with the concentrated area of our cool tone. All right, we're going to cover the whole eye except our highlighted area, which if you have the masking fluid on it, you can kind of do this without any fuss. And I'm just kind of tapping some extra color in there to make sure it gets nice and dark, and we'll allow it to dry. So I'm going to move on to the beak. I'm mixing a little bit more of our cooler tone and make sure that's nice and dark. Finalize this shape here. All right, rinsing my brush off, dabbing it off gently so it's just a little bit damp. I'm going to pull some of this highlight that goes over here. All right, now back to our eye, and we're going to cover almost the entire thing, except we're going to leave kind of a crescent shape down here. Now you can, if you've already covered that, you can pull by taking the damp brush, and I go into more detail in the video that I will have linked here about our realistic watercolor bird eyes. But if you just kind of paint carefully around that area, you don't have to do that more advanced technique. Again, and add our nostril in here, which should be nice and dark. All right, with a nice clean brush, if you need to, go ahead and switch out your water. I'm going to do another pass on our orange section, and then we'll work on these lighter feathers. All right, similar to how we did the feathers on the cap for the second pass and the wing, we're going to allow it to be a little more textured, and we're also going to pay a little bit closer attention to either highlights or some deeper sections. So areas that are a little bit more red, which there's a red section here, I'm going to dip into ever so slightly into some of our Windsor Red or alizarin crimson, depending on what you have, and just tuck that in right there. And then blend this out. I'm going to actually water it down just a bit, dabbing it off so it's not too wet, but I want it to be a little bit lighter, because while it's dark kind of around the eye and the beak, it's a little bit lighter over here. All right, and then it's a little lighter here. If you've got too much water, just dab it off on your rag or your paper towel. And then it gets a little bit sharper over here. So I'm going to kind of capture those feathers again, kind of the negative painting, and then we're just going to swoop it up, and then we've got this irregular edge. And I'm going to kind of carve out where this section goes, a little more detailed than last time, and then bring it up. Carving out this section, paying a little more attention to where the detail's going, and then bringing it up. If there's any area that you're thinking, you know, it needs just a little bit more life and interest, I'm going to do a glaze of that yellow. I feel like a little bit of a glow in here. See how that just brightens that up? All right, again with our yellow, just kind of placing it quickly. I'm not, while it looks like I'm doing a lot of strokes like this, I'm not rubbing back and forth, because that will reactivate the paint underneath and give me kind of a bald spot. We're just adding a little bit of warmth and overall glow to the piece. A little bit more of our red to kind of tuck in here. Now, is adding all this necessary? No, but I think it does add a little bit more interest and depth. All right, now we're going to actually go back to our ultramarine blue and add, this faded just a little bit more than I like. So I'm just going to kind of add some of that back in here. Still working a little bit with kind of some negative feather texture. Rinsing my brush off, dabbing it off. I'm just going to kind of blend this up. And we're going to do the same thing on this side, where some of it's going to be kind of carved out as texture. Some of it we're just going to kind of blend in. We will go in with kind of the gray or brown tones. I haven't quite decided which yet, but I think having the blue underneath will really help. I'm also going to add that in here, just a touch. I really like that blue right up next to the orange. And a little bit right here as well. So really flicking these around a little bit. Trying to keep them connected because then it looks a little bit more intentional. And then smoother over here. A little more color. And back and forth. Okay, now we're going to go into our cooler tone color, and again, we're working very lightly. We're just going to add some of this texture that we have down here. Whoops, going to dab that off. That's a little too much. I'll just kind of blend it out, bring some of this pigment down here, wipe my brush off, pick just a touch of that up. I'm actually going to pull it up into the orange so that there's a little bit of overlap there. Wiping my brush off. That'll help this look kind of like a unified piece. Picking some of this up. And then down here as well, just with that nice light color. And we're not just making lines all over the place. See how they're kind of connected in this line that kind of fades? So we've got like this shape here that fades out. We're going to do another one that's a different shape, but how they're kind of connected, that helps it to look a little bit less like I'm just throwing lines around and a little bit more intentional. I'm just kind of making some light stripes that will connect over here. And just like on this side, we broke into the orange a little bit. I'm going to do that down here. Not as much, because we have kind of this balance between a lot of texture and not as much. We don't want to totally break that. But while we want the eye to rest, we don't want it to look like two different paintings. I'm going to take some of our gray tone and just add a little bit of a shadow down here. Keeping that area nice and white. All right, now one more last touch with the brown on kind of this cap area. I'm going to smooth this just a touch. I think it got a little too textured for my taste. I think it kind of takes away from some of what we have going on down here. I am going to cover this, allow this to be covered, and then go back in with just a touch of the blue. And this is straight blue. And that will help blend that out a little bit. Back to the brown. Whoops. Well, it'll be all right. We'll just leave it. And just adding some final details, mostly on kind of the underside of these wings. And tail feathers. So I'm going to deepen this one right at the base. So I've got most of it kind of wet, and then we're just going to tap in some of this color in here to create kind of that cast shadow. By tapping it in, it'll just kind of fade into the rest of this wet area. All right, gonna do the same thing. This is with the warm color. You can do the cool color. I just happened to grab the warm one. Just darken underneath here. All right, and we'll do the same thing here. I'm going to add a warm layer here. I just see that that's not quite done. Now with the feet, we can kind of play around with the texture again by just letting them kind of come and go. The feet are a little bit thicker at the body, and then they thin out. They get thin, and then they get thicker again. And then they've got claws. And we're just going to fill this one in, work on this second one. And then we'll come back and add very minimal shadows. There won't be a whole lot we can do. Now that our first foot is dry, we're just going to take another layer of these dark tones. I'm actually going to dip into the cool tone for this one. And we're just going to first tap that underneath here because there should be a shadow from the body. And then we're just going to put it carefully on the underside of each of these little talons or toes. It's talons, what they call it collectively. Don't do a ton. All right, we're going to take a quick step back. We're looking at it. I'm going to add a little bit more blue on this edge because I love how this is looking right here. So I'm going to take some of that weak blue, so not a lot of pigment, not a lot of water. Add that here, rinsing my brush off and kind of blending that out. All right. So we're going to call this good at this point. I'm going to remove the masking fluid by carefully, you can either rub your finger across on it just like this. Make sure it's dry. Just take a white eraser like the one at the end of your pencil. Or I often use these large erasers. I'm just going to use my finger because it's readily available. All right, whenever you take the masking fluid off, you want to just kind of touch up any areas where it just kind of looks messy. So here it's looking kind of all bunched up. So I'm actually going to soften that one and kind of reshape some of those. And same thing here. So this one was a little bit softer until I had kind of this oopsie, but it's fine. Nobody will really notice except me. I'm gonna just carefully finalize some of these. This one's a little bit thick, so we're just going to thin it down a touch, but I do like that little bit of a highlight there. And then same thing here, we're just going to kind of lighten it. It's hard to get the masking fluid as thin as you might want, but it's a good way to kind of save some of those crisp white areas. I'm going to soften this because that ended up being kind of a clump. So I'm going to adjust the shape and then I'm going to apply just a gentle glaze over it so it'll still be kind of highlighted, but it'll read a little bit more orange. So that All right, quickly we're going to go into our cool tone color. Let's contrast quickly for our branch. I am just going to keep it very loose. I've been adding a little bit more water. I don't want this to be the focal point. I just kind of want it to be enough to be there. Rinsing it off again, dabbing it off to help this kind of blend out. And then same here, get those feet. I'm going to take just a touch more and add it to the base and allow that to blend out because there should be some shadow here. So while that's still wet, that'll blend up nicely and should give us a little bit of a gentle shadow. And that's all I'm going to do here. I might go in later and add a little bit of detail for like this little knot, but I'm not thinking that I want to spend a lot of time here. I just want it to be enough there so that the bird isn't just like floating with its legs sticking out like a nutcase. And there we have our finished robin. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, that you found it helpful. And if you're interested in more watercolor birds, make sure that you subscribe because we have kind of a series coming up where we're going to be drawing and painting some different birds. This is just the very beginning. Anyway, I hope that you are having a wonderful, wonderful day. And until next time, Happy painting.